Ghostbusters, when the past collides with the soul. JAYLA'S Ghostbusters fan-raid story. Mr. Venkman. It wasn't a monster, not in the way stories usually tell it. He didn't scream, he didn't hit, he didn't even argue. He just left. He was always busy, always on the phone, always packing a briefcase, always saying, "Not now, Peter." He wore his schedule like armor, used meetings as shields, used silence as strategy. And Peter, even at 4, knew what that meant. Mr. Venkman didn't avoid his son because he hated him. He avoided him because Peter's emotions were inconvenient, loud, messy, real. And Mr. Venkman didn't do real, he did results. Peter used to watch him from the hallway, tall, polished, terrifying. A man who could silence a room with a glance. Peter didn't understand the language of power yet, but he understood the feeling of being dismissed. He loved his father. So deeply it ached in ways his 4-year-old heart couldn't name. That ache was sacred, and it was ignored. Silence, absence, and the kind of heartbreak that rewires a nervous system. Peter Venkman, before the charm, before the sarcasm, before the Ghostbusters. Peter wasn't born with a smirk. He earned it. Before the wisecracks, before the flirtations, before the Ghostbusters jacket and the swagger, Peter Venkman was a quiet, loyal, emotionally articulate little boy who noticed everything. Not just the words people said, but the ones they swallowed. The tension in a room, the way adults smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. The way silence could feel like punishment. He didn't know why he noticed. He just did. He was 4. He was lonely. He was bullied, not with fists, but with neglect. He was the kind of child who asked, "Are you okay?" and got told, "Don't be so sensitive." He had no siblings, no buffer, no one to delay the adult world for him. And the spectral world, ghosts, paranormal, it didn't interest him, not yet. Not until he turned 5 and realized no one was coming for him. Edmund Hoover didn't live loudly. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who made rooms colder by sitting in them. The kind of man whose silence felt like a verdict. In life, he was a high-ranking leader in evil Shandor's cult of Goza, not a zealot with fire in his eyes, a surgeon of fear, a man whispered about as the Collector. His obsession wasn't with relics or rituals, it was with people, their silence, their fear, their helplessness. On paper, he was brilliant, a former student, a friend of Mr. Venkman. But everyone who met him felt the same thing, that his gaze lingered too long, that the air grew thinner when he entered a room, that warmth drained from the walls like blood from a wound. He didn't break doors. He didn't shout. He laughed in the kitchen with Mr. Venkman like the house already belonged to him. 4-year-old Peter felt it first. Children always do. He climbed into Hoover's lap once, crying, reaching for comfort. Hoover didn't move, didn't hold him, didn't even look at him. That silence was the scar, because cruelty hurts, but indifference haunts. Into the bone-chilling atmosphere. All right, here we go. Edmund Hoover sat at the table perfectly still, hands folded, eyes unreadable, like he was waiting for something or someone. Mrs. Venkman carried Peter in, his small arms wrapped tight around her neck, his face pressed into her shoulder. Not shy, rigid. like he knew something deeper than any adult in the room wanted to admit. "Peter," she whispered gently, shifting him so his head peeked out. "This is Daddy's old friend. His name is Edmund. He's going to be staying with us for a while." Peter didn't look at Edmund. His eyes darted to the wall clock, the back door, anywhere but the stranger at the table. "Say hello, sweetheart," his mother urged. Peter's voice was muffled in her shoulder. "I don't want to." Her smile was thin, practiced, the kind meant to smooth over adult awkwardness. "Don't be rude, Peter. Mr. Hoover's a guest." Finally, Peter's eyes flicked toward Edmund. What he saw wasn't cruelty in motion. It was something worse. Hoover's gaze didn't meet his. It passed through him, like Peter wasn't even flesh and bone, just part of the wallpaper. Peter tugged at his mother's sleeve, whispering so quietly she had to bend down. "Mommy, he doesn't like kids." Her arms tightened around him, almost reflexively, but her tone stayed light. "That's not true. He just doesn't know you yet." Peter shook his head, the certainty of a child stronger than reason. "He doesn't like me." Edmund shifted in his chair, lips pressing into what might have been a smile, though it never reached his eyes. His silence filled the room heavier than words. Mrs. Venkman kissed Peter's hair, trying again. "Sweetheart, you'll see. He's just quiet. You'll get used to him." Peter's whisper came sharp this time, urgent, almost trembling. "I don't want to get used to him." For the first time, Edmund spoke. His voice was flat, sterile, like cold glass. "Children cry too much. Best they learn early to sit still." Peter buried his face deeper in his mother's shoulder, clinging harder now, as though the words themselves were sharp. His small body shook with something beyond fear, a recognition. His mother hesitated. For a second, her grip on her son said she felt it too. But then she set Peter down, smoothed his hair. "Mommy will be back soon. Be good for Mr. Hoover." Peter's eyes widened, his voice cracked, desperate. "Don't leave me with him." But she kissed his forehead, turned to Edmund with an uneasy smile, and walked to the door. The latch clicked shut, and the silence that followed was worse than any scream. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and cigarette smoke. Neither belonged to Mrs. Venkman. Emnon sat at the table perfectly still, the monster in the room. Peter's mother always believed Edmund was just lost. She was the kind of woman who made excuses for silence, who mistook emotional vacancy for mystery. In college, she dated Mr. Venkman. They all agreed Edmund was part of the family now. He was strange, yes, but strange could be softened. Strange could be saved. Peter disagreed. Peter didn't have theories. He had instinct. A real monster doesn't need claws. It doesn't need fangs. It doesn't need to roar. A real monster is quiet, calculated, emotionally sterile. It doesn't rage. It removes. It doesn't punish. It teaches. It doesn't break bones. It breaks a leaf. A real monster is someone who sees a child's vulnerability and doesn't flinch. Not because they're overwhelmed, not because they're confused, but because they don't care. A real monster is someone who hears a 4-year-old say, "I feel scared," and responds not with comfort, but with silence, with stillness, with a lesson. A real monster is someone who doesn't misunderstand you. They understand you perfectly. And they use that understanding to hurt you better, Edwin Hoover was a monster. He didn't yell. He didn't strike. He didn't lose control. He chose control. He weaponized stillness. He turned silence into a scalpel. Edmund Hoover didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors. He punished with volume. He punished with absence. He was the kind of man who made a room feel colder just by sitting in it. Not because of what he said, because of what he withheld. Affection, acknowledgement, humanity. When Peter texted the book, Edmund didn't react with anger. He didn't snatch it away. He didn't scold. He walked over slowly, deliberately. His footsteps didn't echo. They absorbed sound. Peter looked up, expecting a reprimand. What he got was worse. Edmund crouched beside him, not to meet him at eye level, to invade his space. His voice was quiet, flat, emotionless. Do you know what happens to little boys who touch what doesn't belong to them? Peter's breath hitched instinctively. I just wanted to see. Edmund didn't blink, didn't soften, didn't explain. This book is older than your name, older than your tears. You weren't reading. You were opening. Peter's lip trembled. He didn't understand, but he felt it. Then Edmund reached out, not fast, not harsh. He closed the book slowly, deliberately, on Peter's fingers. Not enough to break them, just enough to teach. Peter gasped, not from pain, from shock. The weight of the book pressed into his knuckles, not crushing, just pinning, like a specimen under glass. Edmund didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't care. He let the silence do the damage. Peter whimpered, tears spilled, but Edmund didn't react. He stood, turned, walked away. No threat, no warning, no comfort, just cold. And Peter sat there, hand curled to his chest, sobbing, not because of the book, but because of the lesson. That some people don't hurt you to feel powerful. They hurt you because they feel nothing. Edmund Hoover stood a few feet away, arms folded, watching Peter like he was a failed experiment. Not angry, not amused, just done. Then the front door opened. Familiar ones. Mr. Venkman walked in, briefcase still in hand, coat damp from the rain. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Peter looked up, eyes pleading. For rescue. Mr. Venkman didn't rush forward, didn't kneel, didn't ask what happened. He looked at Edmund, then at Peter, then he laughed. Not a belly laugh, not a chuckle. A short, sharp exhale like he'd just heard a mildly amusing joke. He touched the book, didn't he? Mr. Venkman said. Edmund nodded once. He needed a lesson. Peter's mouth opened, but no words came out. His voice had retreated somewhere unreachable. Mr. Venkman walked past him, set his briefcase on the counter, loosened his tie. Well, he said, pouring himself a drink. Better he learns now. Didn't cry, didn't scream. Because this was worse than the book, worse than the pain. This was confirmation. That Edmund Hoover wasn't just allowed in the house. He was endorsed. That Mr. Venkman didn't just fail to protect him, he agreed with the monster. And in that moment, Peter learned something colder than Hoover's silence. That betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it walks in wearing your father's shoes. Sometimes it laughs. The night Peter tried to make peace. Peter was small. Too small to understand betrayal, but big enough to hope. He thought maybe he and Edmund Hoover had just started off wrong. Maybe if he asked nicely, maybe if he offered to play, maybe if he smiled, Edmund would see he was good, that he was worth kindness. So Peter approached him, quietly, carefully, holding a toy in his hand. Edmund didn't answer. He looked at Peter like he was noise. Then he stood, walked forward, and grabbed Peter by the wrist. Not fast, just coldly. Peter didn't scream. He was too confused, too trusting. Edmund led him down the hallway, past the bathroom, past the kitchen, to the basement door. Peter hesitated. "Where are we going?" Edmund didn't answer. He opened the door. It creaked. The air behind it was colder, staler. Peter tried to pull back. Edmund didn't let go. He pushed Peter forward, not with force, with finality. Peter stumbled down the first step. Then Edmund closed the door. Peter's fingers, small, soft, trusting, were still on the edge. The door slammed shut. Peter screamed, not because of the pain, because of the shock, because of the betrayal. His fingers throbbed, his body shook, and Edmund Hoover? He stood there, unmoved, unbothered. Then he turned, walked to the kitchen, picked up the landline phone, and laughed. The basement. It was dark, cold, empty. Peter sat on the floor, cradling his hand, tears streaking down his cheeks. He waited. For his mom, for his dad, for anyone. But no one came. Upstairs, Edmund Hoover laughed, talked on the phone, told stories. Peter could hear the muffled sound of ice clinking in a glass. And somewhere in the house, maybe in the walls, Ivo Shandor watched, not with eyes, with presence. Peter didn't know who Shandor was yet, but he felt it. The way the air shifted, the way the shadows moved. He wasn't just locked in a basement. He was offered to something. The lesson. Peter didn't cry for long, not because the pain stopped, but because something inside him froze. He learned that night that kindness could be a trap, that asking to play could get you punished, that monsters don't always growl. Sometimes they smile. Sometimes they laugh on the phone while you bleed in the dark. And that soul-deep trauma, not just pain, not just fear, but the rewriting of reality. Peter Venkman deserved so much better. Peter sat in the passenger seat, stuffed animal in his lap, a picture of his mother clutched in one hand. He didn't cry. He didn't ask questions. He just watched the road. Mr. Venkman was unusually gentle. He played music softly. He asked Peter if he was hungry. He even smiled. "You're going to meet someone very important," he said. "He's a friend. He's smart. He'll take care of you." Peter nodded. Because when you're 4, you believe what your father says, even when your stomach twists, even when the air feels wrong. The drive lasted hours. 4? 7? Time blurred. Peter watched the trees blur past, watched the sky darken, watched his father's hands on the wheel, steady, calm, like nothing was wrong. The drop-off. They arrived at a large building, stone, cold, too quiet. Mr. Venkman carried Peter's backpack, set down his toys, unpacked his food. He knelt beside Peter. "You'll be okay here, just for a little while." Peter looked up. "Will you stay?" Mr. Venkman smiled, I'll be back soon." Then he stood, walked to the entrance, and shook hands with Ivo Shandor. Peter watched it happen, watched the handshake, watched the nod, watched his father turn, walk back to the car, and drive away. No hug, no goodbye, just departure. The guest room. Peter was led to a guest room. It was clean, too clean, the kind of clean that feels like no one's ever slept there. He was given juice, crackers, a blanket. He drank the juice because he was thirsty, because he was 4. Minutes later, his limbs felt heavy. His thoughts slowed. His eyes blurred. He didn't fall asleep. He was taken. Another. The lab room. Peter woke up in a different room. Metal, cold, dimly lit. He was strapped to a chair, not tightly, but enough to feel owned. And then he saw her. His mother, standing beside Shandor. Not restrained, not panicked, just present. Peter blinked. "Mom?" She didn't answer. Shandor placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's ready." Peter's heart cracked. Not because of the room, not because of the straps, but because of the look in his mother's eyes. Not fear, not guilt. Resignation. Shandor leaned in. "You're special, Peter. You see things, feel things. That makes you useful." Peter whimpered, "I want to go home." His mother stepped forward. "Sweetheart, this is important. You'll understand one day." Peter shook his head. "I don't want to understand." Shandor smiled. "That's the first lesson." Another. Soul-deep betrayal. This wasn't just abandonment. This was ritualized betrayal. A child handed over by both parents, one with a handshake, one with silence. Peter didn't scream. He didn't fight. He froze. Because when betrayal is that deep, that orchestrated, that cold, the body doesn't resist. It records. And that night, Peter Venkman's soul learned the truth. That monsters don't always hide. Sometimes they drive you there. Sometimes they tuck you in. Sometimes they share your last name. Peter was small, too small for the metal bed. His feet didn't reach the edge. His arms trembled as he clutched the blanket they gave him, thin, synthetic, the kind that doesn't hold warmth. The room was dim, not dark. Dim, like someone wanted him to see, but not clearly. He didn't know what time it was. He didn't know where he was. He just knew he wasn't safe. And then he saw it. Not a ghost, not a shadow, a demon. It didn't float, it crawled, its limbs bent wrong, its face was too smooth, too still, like it hadn't earned its features yet. It didn't want to scare him. It wanted to wear him. Peter screamed, not because he saw something, because he felt it. The demon didn't reach for his soul, it reached for his bones. To snap them, to hollow them, to climb inside. Peter cried. He cried for his father. He cried for justice. He cried for love. He cried until his throat burned, until his voice cracked, until the metal bed felt like a coffin. Jayla, this is soul-deep horror. Peter's mother didn't rush in. She didn't hold him. She turned up the volume. Not of music, of the machine. The one humming in the corner. The one that made the demon sharper, hungrier. Peter screamed louder. "I'll be good. I promise. I'll stay out of the way." She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She did something worse. She watched. Not with guilt, not with hesitation, with acceptance. Like this was necessary. Like this was earned. Peter's father was nearby. He wasn't gone. He wasn't unreachable. He was pretending. Pretending not to hear. Pretending not to know. Pretending that silence was protection. Peter cried for him. "Dad, please, please!" No answer. Just footsteps. Just a door closing. Just the sound of betrayal echoing down the hallway. Soul deep burn. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just cruelty. This was ritualized evil. Ivo Shandor orchestrated it. Edmund Hoover enforced it. Mr. Venkman enabled it. And Peter's mother participated. Peter wasn't just abandoned. He was offered. And that's what makes this soul deep. Not the demon. Not the straps. Not the screams. The betrayal. The moment a child learns that love is not guaranteed. That sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who hand you over. The night of the orphanage. Peter didn't cry when the police arrived. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for his backpack. He just sat there, small, silent, obedient. A good little boy. The officer didn't kneel, didn't ask what happened. He tossed the backpack beside Peter like it was trash. Peter wanted to scream, wanted to say, "I was hurt, I was betrayed, I was offered." But his voice was gone, not stolen, shut down. The car ride was quiet. The orphanage loomed like a punishment. The first 2 days. The nun greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said things like, "You'll be safe here." Peter didn't believe her. Within 2 days, the other children attacked him, not because he was mean, not because he was strange, because he was silent, because he didn't fight back. They beat him, kicked him, held him underwater in the bath until he choked. For Peter, it felt like a dog attack. Fast, unpredictable, animal. He never trusted again. Not the staff, not the children, not the walls. The attic. Peter didn't sleep in a bed. He climbed into the attic, found a corner, made it his own. He talked to the wall, not loudly, just enough to feel like someone was listening. Doctors came. They said, "He's dissociating." They said, "He might have Asperger's." They said, "He's out of place." No one said he was betrayed. The grandmother. She came like a miracle. She didn't ask questions. She just took him home. Peter clung to her, not because she was safe, because she was not them. But when she died, everything cracked again. His mother and father arrived, smiling, pretending. Peter hid behind his grandfather's leg, terrified, not of punishment, of presence. He was nonverbal until 12, not because he couldn't speak, because he had nothing safe to say. Ray Stans and Egon Spengler. At 12, Peter met Ray. Ray didn't ask him to perform. He didn't ask him to explain. He just held space. Peter spoke. At 15, Peter met Egon. Egon didn't flinch at Peter's muttering. He called him brilliant. Egon taught him to love the unknown, not because it was safe, but because it was honest. Ghost didn't lie. Ghost didn't pretend. Ghost didn't smile while hurting you. And Peter? He became the man who could face the dead, because he'd already survived the living. Chapter 9. The Reckoning That Screamed Back. Peter woke up gasping. Tears streaked his face. His fists clenched the sheets like they were the last thing tethering him to this world. Ray was already there, arms around him, whispering, "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe," like a mantra. Egon placed food on the nightstand, not because Peter would eat, but because Egon knew rituals mattered. Winston turned on the lights, grounding the room in reality. Slimer hovered, silent. He didn't slime. He didn't joke. He became a blanket, green, glowing, gentle. But Peter's heart? It was shattered glass, and no blanket could hold that. Peter sobbed, not the kind of sob that asks for comfort, the kind that demands to be heard. "I hate them," he screamed. "Shandor, Hoover, my father, all of them. The whole damn world's cold. They left me. They turned their backs." He pounded the mattress, his voice cracked, his body shook. Ray held him tighter. Winston knelt beside him. Egon didn't speak, but his presence was unshakable. Peter collapsed into Ray's arms, whispering, "I'm so small, I can't hold myself up anymore." And that night, the Ghostbusters didn't fight a ghost. They fought silence. They fought the weight of one man's broken heart. The next morning, Peter was a wreck. But he refused to hide. Slimer tried to entertain him, dancing, floating, mimicking. But Peter was dying. Not physically, emotionally. Ray held him frantic. Winston paced. Egon watched, calculating how to save a soul. Peter was almost unreachable. Until he reached. He held his friends, cried into their shoulders, and whispered, "I need to see my parents." They didn't welcome him with open arms. They welcomed him with fury disguised as patience, with smiles sharpened into knives. Peter collapsed to the floor. His knees buckled. His voice broke. He crawled to the door, fingers shaking the knob like a child locked in. "Please," he begged, "just hold me, just once." His father stepped forward. Towering, cold. "I believed in them too, Pete, when you were one. Let the ghosts out." And the ghosts came. Not just any ghosts. Hoover's brood, Hoover's whispers, the ones Peter had trapped, the ones he'd survived. They swirled around the room. Peter's mother screamed. His father smirked. Peter curled into the corner, silent. Almost done. Then, light. Amber, soft. Peter woke in a different world. Ilyara and Thalos ran barefoot through fields, laughing. Breathless, human. Peter watched, hidden, not smirking, not joking, just witnessing. "You loved someone," he whispered. "You were someone before the thunder, before the temple. God, you were beautiful." Then, the baby, stillborn, no cry, no breath. Ilyara screamed, not with rage, with grief so deep it bent the room. Peter watched, hand over mouth, eyes wide. "You didn't want power," he whispered. "You wanted to stop the ache." He stepped forward, placed his hand over hers. "You were never a monster. You were a mother. You were left." She didn't pull away. She breathed. One breath, then another. Now he pounded the mattress. His voice cracked. His body shook. Ray held him tighter. Winston kneeled beside him. Egon didn't speak, but his presence was unshakable. Peter stood, trembling, but standing. Chapter 11. The embrace that broke the curse. Peter stood in the dreamlike world, but it wasn't a dream. It was memory's graveyard, the kind of place where grief doesn't echo, it screams in silence. Ilyara placed the baby down, not like a mother, like a mourner afraid the ear might bruise him again. Her hands trembled. Her breath was shallow. Her eyes were infinite, like she'd seen every version of pain and still chose to stay. Peter watched, hand over mouth, eyes wide. He'd seen Gozer split cities. He'd seen her wield chaos like a blade, but this was the moment the god was born. Not in ambition, not in vengeance, in loss so deep it bent the timeline. You didn't want power, Peter whispered. You wanted to stop the ache. You wanted to rewrite death. He stepped closer. The floor creaked like memory. The walls pulsed like old wounds. I got older, he said. I understood. And it still broke me. Ilara turned. Her voice was a whisper carved from bone. He never breathed, and I never did again. She sat beside the cradle, held the blanket to her chest like it still held warmth. His name was Oren, she said. I chose it because it sounded like sunrise. I thought he'd be light. I thought he'd be loud. I thought he'd scream and cry and ruin my sleep and make me believe in something bigger than grief. She paused. Her hands trembled. He never cried. He never opened his eyes. He never got to know the sound of my voice. I sang to him for 9 months, and he gave me silence. Peter's throat tightened. He wanted to reach out, but he didn't, because this wasn't pain that wanted comfort. This was pain that wanted to be witnessed. And then he did something no Ghostbuster had ever done. He hugged her. Not a polite embrace, not a gesture of pity. He held her, held the grief, held the mother who had been left behind by time, by gods, by the world. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't strike. She didn't roar. She collapsed into his arms, into the truth. The world cracked. Not loudly. Like a whisper splitting a cathedral, the sky bent. The stars flickered. The timeline shuddered. Because this wasn't a battle, this was a reckoning. And Peter didn't run. Peter didn't joke. Peter stayed. Ghostbusters, Shadows of the Collector. Chapter 12, The Cord That Never Broke. Peter didn't just enter the dream world. He was summoned. Not by gods, not by ghosts, by Oren, the child who never breathed. Oren's spirit had reached across time, across grief, across myth. He didn't cry at life, so he called in death. Peter woke with a gasp. Not gentle, violent. Like breath had been stolen and returned too fast. He stumbled, collapsed, and fell into his father's arms. The same arms that once betrayed him. The same man who once handed him over. Peter sobbed, not like a man, like a child who never stopped hoping. And something in his father's chest shifted, not loudly, but permanently. The belief Peter had carried, the belief that somewhere, somehow his father could return, traced back, a cord, a thread, a miracle. His father held him, not like a stranger, like a man who remembered. Peter's mother stood nearby, stone-faced, unmoved, until she saw him. Not the man, the boy, small, shaking, still waiting to be chosen. Her face faltered. Her knees buckled. She knelt. She embraced. Not out of guilt, out of recognition. The Ghostbusters stood in silence. Ray's eyes flooded. Winston bowed his head. Egon didn't speak, but his hand trembled. Slimer hovered, glowing faintly, like even the dead knew this was sacred. This wasn't just healing. This was reversal. This was correction. This was karma with a heartbeat. Peter didn't speak.